"You will sit by my grandson at dinner," announced the Dowager Duchess of Loxley, "and you will not, on any account, agree with a single word he says." Imogen Hartley, who had been quietly winding the old woman's wool by the morning-room fire, looked up in alarm. "Your Grace, I am a companion. I am paid to be agreeable." "You are paid to be agreeable to me," said the Dowager, "and I find disagreement vastly more entertaining. Besides, my grandson has been agreed with by every fortune-hunting mama and simpering miss in 3 counties since he was 19. It has made him insufferable. A dose of honest contradiction will do him good, the way cold water does a sleepwalker good." She smiled, and her old eyes, sharp as a wren's, glittered with some private design. "Now, the blue gown, I think, the one that was Cecilia's. It will suit your colouring far better than it ever suited hers." And that was how Imogen Hartley, poor relation, companion to a dowager, possessor of £40 a year and not one prospect in the world, came to be seated at the right hand of the Duke of Loxley at his own house party, in a borrowed blue silk that made her grey eyes look like rain over water. The Duke arrived late. He was tall and dark and faintly weary, with the particular tiredness of a man who has been admired too long and known too little. The table rose. The débutantes fluttered. Imogen, who had been instructed not to flutter, kept winding an imaginary skein of wool in her lap and waited. "Grandmother," he said, kissing the old woman's cheek, "you look conspiring." "I always look conspiring. It is the secret of my long life. Sit, Theodore, you are letting the soup grow cold and the young ladies grow desperate." She gestured at Imogen with a fan. "You have not met Miss Hartley. She is my companion, and she has opinions. Do try not to crush them. I have grown fond of them." The Duke turned. His glance touched Imogen, took in the blue gown and the plain dressing of her hair and the absence of any jewel at her throat, and concluded, as such glances do, that here was nobody of consequence. He inclined his head with perfect, dismissive courtesy. "Miss Hartley." "Your Grace." He turned back to the soup. It might have ended there, as 1,000 such evenings end, with the great man's attention sliding off the poor woman like water off marble. But the Dowager Duchess had not lived 73 years and outlasted 2 husbands and a regency without learning how to set a snare. "Theodore," she said sweetly, "do tell Miss Hartley your views on the new poetry. She thinks it overwrought. I told her you would defend it." The Duke, who had in fact privately found the new poetry overwrought himself, found that his pride would not permit him to agree with a woman before he had even properly heard her. "Overwrought," he repeated. "On the contrary, Miss Hartley, I find it the only honest writing of the age." Imogen set down her spoon. "Then you find honesty consists chiefly of exclamation marks, Your Grace." A small silence fell at that end of the table. "I beg your pardon?" "Forgive me. Only that a great deal of feeling, very loudly announced, is not the same as a great deal of feeling. A man who tells you 40 times in a single stanza that his heart is breaking has generally left himself no room to actually break it." She picked her spoon back up. "But I am only a companion. I dare say I read the wrong sorts of books." The Dowager Duchess hid her face in her wine-glass. The Duke of Loxley looked at Miss Hartley, as though she had reached across the table, and turned his head with her 2 hands. "And what," he said slowly, "are the right sorts of books?" She told him. She was wrong about some of it, in his opinion, and gloriously, unanswerably right about the rest, and somewhere between the fish and the pheasant the Duke discovered that he had not laughed at his own table in a very long time, and that he was laughing now. The débutantes drifted off into talk of bonnets. The Dowager affected to doze, and the Duke of Loxley argued with a penniless companion about poetry and pride and the proper way to roast a chestnut, and did not once look at his watch. "You will think me very forward," Imogen said at one point, when she had quite forgotten to be careful, "but I do not think you believe half of what you defend. I think you take the opposite side of every question as a kind of armor, so that no one may ever guess which way your heart truly leans." The Duke went still. It was, of all the things said to him that evening, the only one that frightened him, for it was true, and no one in 35 years had ever once noticed it. "And which way does it lean, Miss Hartley?" he asked, more quietly than he intended. "Since you seem to know me so well on an hour's acquaintance." "I have not the smallest idea," she said cheerfully, helping herself to the pheasant. "That is rather the point of armor, is it not? But I should very much like to find out, and I dare say no one else at this table has ever wished to." He had no answer for that. He found to his own astonishment that he did not want one. He wanted only for the dinner never to end. "She is clever," he told his grandmother afterward, in the library, in the tone of a man reporting a curious natural phenomenon. "Your Miss Hartley. Unusually clever." "Is she?" said the Dowager, examining her cards. "I had not noticed." The country house party ran a fortnight, and the Dowager Duchess of Loxley conducted it like a general conducting a campaign she had already won. There was an excursion to the ruined abbey, and somehow the Dowager's gout flared at the precise moment that left only her grandson free to hand Miss Hartley across the broken stones. There was a rainy afternoon, and somehow the only fire drawing properly was the small one in the morning room, where Miss Hartley happened to be reading aloud. There was a card party at which the Dowager paired them with such transparent purpose that even the débutantes began to whisper, and a musical evening at which the old woman declared, unanswerably, that Miss Hartley should turn the pages for whoever played, and then ensured that the Duke was the one who played. At the ruined abbey, handing her across the broken stones as his grandmother's gout had so conveniently arranged, the Duke found himself reluctant to let go of her hand once the obstacle was passed. They had outwalked the rest of the party. The roofless nave stood open to a sky full of swift grey clouds, and the ivy had climbed the old pillars until stone and green were one thing, and Imogen stopped in the middle of it and tipped her face up and said nothing at all for a long moment. "You are very quiet," he observed. "I had not thought in your nature." "I was thinking," she said, "that there is something hopeful in a ruin. Everyone built it to last forever, and it did not, and yet here it still is, more beautiful broken than it ever was whole. It is a great comfort, I find, to a person whose own plans have all come to nothing." She caught herself and coloured. "Forgive me. I forget my place when I am happy." "Do not," said the Duke with a sudden roughness. "Do not, on my account, ever remember it again." She looked at him then, and something passed between them in the green and broken quiet that neither of them had words for, and both of them, walking back, were careful not to name. He was not unaware of being managed. He was a clever man, and his grandmother had never in her life been subtle. But he found, with a kind of bewildered honesty, that he did not mind. He found that he looked for the blue gown across crowded rooms. He found that the witty replies he saved up through tedious days were all of them addressed, in the privacy of his own mind, to Imogen Hartley. He found that when she laughed, really laughed, the surprised laugh she gave when something delighted her past her careful composure, something in his chest came loose that he had not known was bound. Imogen, for her part, knew exactly what was being done, and knew exactly why it could come to nothing, and guarded her heart with the grim economy of a woman who has only one and cannot afford to spend it foolishly. "You should not," she told the Dowager Duchess one evening, putting away the wool, "throw us together so. People are talking. It is unkind to me, who must leave when the party ends, and to him who will marry an earl's daughter as he ought." The old woman regarded her for a long moment. "Child," she said at last, and the mischief had gone out of her voice, leaving something gentler underneath. "Do you imagine I have lived to my age and learned to read a man's heart only when it suits a comedy? I am not throwing you together. I am only declining to keep you apart, which is a different and far older sport. My grandson has been loved for his title since before he could walk. Not once in 35 years have I seen a woman make him forget he had one, until you." She patted Imogen's hand. "I am old, my dear. I should like to see him happy before I go, and I have no patience left for waiting on a fortune that would only make him miserable. Let me meddle. I am very good at it." Imogen could not answer. Her eyes had filled, and she would not let them spill. It was the Duke himself who settled the matter on the last morning of the party in the rose garden, where his grandmother had arranged, of course, for them to meet alone. "My grandmother," he said, "has been conducting a siege." "I know it," said Imogen. "I have tried to lift it." "Yes, I noticed that too." He turned to face her, and all the practiced ease had gone out of him, leaving a man who looked, for the first time, uncertain. "Miss Hartley, I am going to say something now without the smallest particle of cleverness, because I find that with you cleverness has entirely deserted me, and I begin to think that is the truest thing I know about myself. I have been agreed with my whole life. I have been flattered and pursued and never once contradicted, and I had grown to despise myself a little for being so easy to please. And then a woman in a borrowed blue gown told me my favorite poetry was overwrought, and I have not had a single peaceful thought since." He drew a breath. "My grandmother saw it long before I did. I am slower than she, I always have been, but I see it now. I do not want an earl's daughter. I do not want to be agreed with. I want to spend the rest of my life being told by you exactly how I am wrong about everything, and I want to love you while you do it, if you will have me." Imogen Hartley, poor relation, companion, possessor of £40 a year, looked up at the Duke of Loxley with rain-grey eyes that had at last, helplessly, spilled over. "You understand," she said unsteadily, "that I shall go on disagreeing with you. I am counting on it. Forever. About the poetry especially." "Marry me," said the Duke, "and we shall argue about the poetry until we are both as old and as outrageous as my grandmother, and I shall die a happy man." So she married him, the Dowager Duchess of Loxley, who had won her campaign without ever once admitting she was fighting one, wept openly at the wedding and then claimed it was the draught from the chapel door. She lived another 11 years long enough, she said, to be thoroughly vindicated, and to the end of her days she maintained, to anyone foolish enough to credit a love match to chance, that she had seen the whole of it across a dinner table on the very first night, in the way her grandson had set down his spoon to listen. "A man's eyes," the old dowager liked to say, settling her shawls, "will always tell you the truth a great deal sooner than his mouth will. The trick is simply to be watching when he doesn't know you are." And the Duke and Duchess of Loxley, who disagreed about a great many things across a long and happy marriage, never once disagreed about that.